sometimes those stories, they stick with you, obviously, because here we are, 40 some odd years later, and we're still talking about them and we're still laughing about them, and they're still true. And I tell my sons that as well. I say, hey, look, this is the way it was. This is the way it is. And there's been such a shift in our lives and the way we go about living. My grandfather was born in 1906. Think about all the things that he saw in his life, or that my parents saw in their lives. They went from, my parents were both born before or immediately during World War II, 1939 and 1941. And, it wasn't long after that, we had jet fighters. Then we had the jet setting age where you could fly anywhere in the United States relatively inexpensively. And they dated long distance. I mean, they were literally commuting to date between Chicago and Washington, D.C. for several years. Think about that in terms of today's economy. It's almost impossible to even fathom being able to go fly to see your significant other every week or every other week. It's an amazing shift that's happened in the world. Now, of course, we can FaceTime.
Right. But we've seen the most. I mean, our generation has seen the most changes, because look at what has happened in the last 20 years. And it's changed so much. Our lives have changed. And how did we go from a rotary phone to a cell phone in our hand, right?
The kitchen phone, and don't tangle the cord up.
Figured out your niche? Are you helping adding value to other people's lives? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to Munira's Musings with your host, Munira Zahabi.
So greetings from Chicagoland. This is another episode of Munira's Musings. Welcome to Chris Groote, who is out of where?
I'm in Statesboro, Georgia, so I'm about an hour northwest of Savannah.
Okay, perfect. I've passed through there when I used to work with the Savannah hospitals.
Okay, yep, you absolutely have.
And then I went up north, and I did some driving there. But welcome to Munira's Musings. Munira's Musings is a show that showcases people from different aspects, people who've done different things. Our guest today is doing something different. He has written a book, The Prodigal Son. Now, I want to know what that story is about, why he wrote this book. But before we get into the book, Chris, welcome to Munira's Musings.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And for those of you who are listening, thank you for joining both of us. I really appreciate you tuning in.
Thank you. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, where should I begin? I left a career in the restaurant business. I was in there for nearly 20 years. And fortunately, I realized it's a much younger man's game. I got out, and my wife and I have a digital marketing agency, which we decided to focus all of our energy into, and we're incredibly successful with that over a period of the last decade or so. And it's been a wonderful journey. We were both speaking at an event in London about 3 or 4 years ago. And it was right around this time. And one of the speakers who was there, we're sitting in on her presentation, and it was really about, what do you want to do this next year? And it dawned on me, it kept coming back, because the idea of the book had been floating around in my head for a long time, for years. And it dawned on me, I really want to bring this to life. And so we got back from London, kind of got through the holidays. And, really right after the new year, I began on this project, and it was a great journey. And, we had to deal with COVID. We've had some things that have upset the apple cart. So the timing wasn't always perfect, but I kept coming back to it, just kept sticking to it. And it's been a wonderful, wonderful project to do. And as part of our marketing, as part of the things we do with our coaching business, if you will, I'm teaching others how to write, not necessarily how to write, but how to bring their own books to life as well. I think that most of us want to see our name in print, or at least think about it every once in a while. And so that's kind of the long story of how we got here. It's been a great journey.
Perfect. That's so wonderful. Now, so you said the idea was floating around in your head. Now, is this something to do with your previous life in the restaurant business?
It really is not. It is completely fictional work. I used to write for a regional magazine, and it was a sporting, hunting, and fishing, outdoors sort of magazine. It went under as a result of COVID, and I wrote for them for a number of years. And it was just kind of little fictional pieces. And as I start to work on Prodigal Sons, I realized that some of the names that were in Prodigal Sons that I was going to use were characters that I had sort of based out and developed. It wasn't exactly the character, but I could see where some of the stories that I told in that little magazine were the same names. And then I could also see that as I was writing it, the characterizations were very similar. It was just a different aspect of their lives. One had to do with them fishing for trout, which had nothing to do with their professional lives or their personal lives. This one was dealing more with their personal and their professional lives, or the things that had happened to them over the course of their life. So that was eye-opening that those pieces had been around. And my earliest short story goes back to about 2003 or 2004, and it's about two brothers. I never published it, and I realized that those characters, though only one is named, are the same characters from Prodigal Sons as they've gone down this path. So in some cases, the stories have been there, or the characters have been there, and Prodigal Sons offered me just the opportunity to flesh that out further, and how'd they get here. So
Wonderful. So you think there's a story in everybody's head?
I think so, whether it be fact or fiction. We, in our respective business pursuits, we pick up things and we become experts at it after a certain point of time. People have said that you're a master after 10,000 hours of doing something. But if I broaden that out and say, if anybody's ever given you money for anything, obviously people think you're an expert in that. Now, you may not be the worldwide expert in it, but you have more expertise than somebody else. And there's a good reason that, maybe it's not 100,000 word novel. Maybe it's not 400 some odd pages. Maybe it's only an ebook that makes somebody's life easier in your business or in your industry. But there's no reason why you can't take that expertise or take that story and put it down into words. It's never been easier to write it, to publish it, to bring it to market, to share it than it is now. And so the hard part, writing, publishing, etc., is a lot of that's been taken care of by technology. So it's not the pursuit that it once was.
I love the fact that you are saying this now. Your book is available in print and in Kindle version on Amazon, right?
Yes, ma'am.
How long did it actually take you to write the book?
Well, funny that you should say that. I mentioned that. Started on January the 20th, 2019. And now in the back of the book, it does say it's October 21st, 2021. Well, that would be 2.5 years, but we have to subtract some for COVID, and we have to subtract some for my wife having been in the hospital. I would say that I was done with the base work by August of 2019. So that was 6 months. Now, I had a lot of editing, proofing, and I put it on the shelf for a while because the publisher that I was going to work with, there had been some things going on. But no, I would say it's about 6 months. But that was focused. And again, I'm a writer. Your book or anybody else's book, it doesn't have to be something there's not you're not going against the calendar. I've been after my father for years. And as you and I talked before the show, he grew up in Chicago. He grew up in a wonderful time in Chicago, a very weird time in Chicago, the 1950s and the 1960s. he was turned down, and I don't know how much of Chicago history you know, but he was turned down to go work for certain people that ran Chicago back in those days. But he knew them, and then he knew the guys that played for the White Sox. He knew guys, and my dad played for the Montreal Alouettes. So, all of these professional sports people, they were all hanging out together in the early 60s in Chicago. And what an incredible series of stories that could be told from that. And then his subsequent life in real estate over the next 50 years. Just a lot of stories there that, maybe nobody would ever read except his family. But it's one of those things that when he's gone, those stories are gone.
So legacy, you leave a legacy, right?
There really is. And again, whether you publish it for the world or you publish it privately for your family. My mother, after my grandmother passed, my mother published for herself and for our family. She published recipes from my grandmother because my grandmother was sort of the matriarch, obviously, of the family. But some of those recipes go back 3 and 4 other generations, and they tie in all these different things. So that was just, to your point, it was a legacy, and it was just there was a lot of little anecdotes in that little recipe book that remind us about the people that are in the family. So there's just things that, we can all share, and excuses to sit down and write that. Whether you just, wrote it longhand in a journal, it's still something. It's a story, and they're great.
And they're great. And the memories, right, you leave behind. And the fact is that, like we were talking before, is like the things and the stories that we talk about after it's happened. And then those memories are etched in very, very well into our memories, and that we can talk about it for generations to come, right?
Exactly.
So what I'm hearing from what you are saying is that it doesn't have to be fact or fiction. It can be anything, short, long recipes, just, things that have happened in your life that you just compile together and put it somewhere where people who are looking for history of your family it's all there. It's all there, right there in front of you.
Exactly. To go back to my father's family again, my great-grandfather immigrated from Holland in 1905. Nobody told him that they didn't speak Dutch in America. Now, he was a fairly educated worker, worked in the maritime industry, but he was still a laborer. And, he had 9 children immigrated with him. He had 8 children immigrated with him. Can you imagine coming to America in 1905, coming into Ellis Island with the clothes on your back and some luggage, and realizing they don't speak English here, or they don't speak Dutch here, and you got to figure out how to get from New York. He had a cousin in Chicago. You have to figure out how to get from New York to Chicago, not speaking English, with very little capital. I mean, that's a story in and of itself that's been lost. Nobody knows how Peter got here or got there, but it's not like you just jump on a plane. It's not like you can take Greyhound. Obviously there's, most likely it's a train, but what an incredible story that's gone.
I know, because 30 years ago, I traveled from Africa to here, and there were things that were missed out, miscommunicated, even though we were in the fax was a very amazing machine at the time. The email hadn't generated as yet, or only those people who are very sophisticated in the modern world had it. Africa didn't have email. Mm-hmm. So when I tried to send a fax to people who supposedly supposed to help me, they would not reply because it was too expensive for the Americans to send me a fax. But think about me. I'm sending you a fax every 2 days trying to figure out what I should bring, what I shouldn't bring, and things are not being communicated. So 1905 is a different term, but 30 years ago, things were different as well.
Without a doubt.
And that's stories we could tell.
No, I agree. And that's what's funny is, as I said, going back to the book, the characters in it, some of them are inspired by young men I knew back in the day. And the book itself flashes back and forth between 4 young men in high school and the 2 young men who are still alive in the present day. And this was written under the premise of it being about 2014 or 2015. And sort of the decisions that they made as young men and how that has affected their lives as older men or men in their middle age as they approach middle age. But the shift in technology is the same. I think about, in high school, we had beepers. Well, some of us had beepers. And, for my father and for men in business, you got a page, you look down, you go, okay, I know the phone number. But for those of us who were teenagers at the time, we had a whole secret code based on the numbers that you could punch in. And we did, and nobody else, I'm sure everybody else did, but to us, it was like, wow, this whole thing, this whole Morse code of, I know exactly what Brent meant when he texted me this. And he didn't have to send a true text in English. It was just a series of numbers, and we knew, okay, he'll be here at, whatever time, or he's running late and he's going to be here whenever he can get here, all these different things. And now in the modern day, we take the young men who had survived, and they're using technology in a completely different way, but they're also, it was enjoyable when I sent a couple of my author's copies to these young men who are now old men like me, and they laughed and they said, that's exactly how we talked. That's exactly what we did. I said, well, I know that is because I was there, but we forget. And one of them gave me a great compliment. He said, Chris, you're like our collective memory. I said, well, yeah, because I stayed down in the rabbit hole for months remembering these things. And I'm familiar with these characters, even though these characters are not you guys. I know these characters are based on you guys. And I know how we interfaced in the 80s, in the 90s. And so it is real. But it's, to your point about faxes, people forget the shift in technology that's taken place in our lifetimes and the incredible shifts in technology. And those are just, my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, she grew up in a sod house in Nebraska, and she went to Chicago to go find a better opportunity for herself with a second grade education. Her parents basically threw her out of the house with a second grade education and you are going to go find an opportunity. They bury you into the jail for that now, but yet this is only probably about 1915. And it was, so barely over 100 years ago, and it's perfectly acceptable.
Yeah,
so
it was. It was because, I was just talking to my grandkids about the fact that, the car seats are so amazing. They have to have a car seat. And a 30 years ago, when I brought my kids, we didn't have car seats. I mean, it wasn't the law until my kids got older, but now everybody needs to have a car seat, and it takes up so much room. But it's safety purposes, I get it, but it just one thing made it so it changed everybody's lives, just little things like that. I mean, we just used to camp ourselves in the back of the pickup and just go to the park.
That was cool. That was the thing to do. Yeah, if you were riding in the back of the truck, that was a lot cooler than being stuck in the passenger seat.
Yeah, no.
But now, oh my goodness, you're going to kill us all. No, I'm not. I wasn't going to kill us all whether we were in the cab or not. But, it's the same thing. What we take to be a pickup truck is radically different than it was in 1985. Look at them now. They're more comfortable and more luxurious than even a high-end luxury car. So, our ideas about things have shifted. And sometimes it's hard for us to get over our preconceived notions, if you will, of, the baggage that you and I had from being older and having seen just a pickup truck or having seen a 55 mile an hour national speed limit. I like old vehicles. And so my wife has the nice new car, and I have a couple old ones, which allow me to bounce around and I can repair them. And I enjoy working on things with my hands. But they were built at a time when the national speed limit was 55. So they don't do 75 on the interstate very well. They're screaming because, they're not designed to do that. Well, that's okay, because I don't live on the interstate, but it's still one of those things where, my sons are like, why is this so much slower than her car? Because it wasn't designed to go fast back then. It was a gas crunch. it was a work truck. It was not something that, you didn't think about fuel economy in 1968, and you didn't think about, going fast in 1986. So
right.
it's funny.
So right. So you said you teach people how to write a book. So give us
Yes, ma'am.
three things that you would help other people to write a book. I mean, well, what are the first three things that they have to do?
The first thing is you have to have the discipline to sit down and do something, maybe not every day, but you need to be able to sit down and do something. If it's every Tuesday, and Wednesday, every 3 days a week, or an hour a day. So finding out a schedule, because you're going to eat an elephant, and it's best to eat that one bite at a time. So there's the first piece. Even if you don't have anything to write, if you have that discipline, you can write. The next thing would be to be very clear on who your reader is. Okay. So it would be, everybody talks about, and I'll give you an example from film. A few years ago, the movie The Hurt Locker, everybody was amazed that a woman could direct this war movie that was so realistic. Well, who cares who the director is? Who cares who the writer of the book is? It's really, how does the reader or the viewer enjoy it? It doesn't matter whether it's a woman, a man, straight, gay, whatever. It's who's the reader, and how does the reader feel about the things I'm sharing? Now, it may be easier from a common point of view. It's hard for me as a ghostwriter, which I do a lot of still. It's hard for me as a ghostwriter to go and get in the mindset of certain people and capture their voice and capture their audience, because it's just not my core audience. It's tough for me to wrap my head around it, but it's very easy for me to do other readers. So understand who's going to be reading it. If you're doing a family book, family members may understand, kind of the whole trend. But if you're writing for, I was writing a children's book about the 1980s. They've never seen a time when we didn't have cell phones. So you may have to think about, how am I approaching my cell phones? How am I approaching the introduction of technology going on in the computer and the .com world of the early 90s? So understanding your reader, understanding your time, and finally, just doing it. Don't try to proof everything as you write it. The book, and this is a great thing that one of my mentors taught me, the book you write is better than the one your neighbor talks about writing.
That's awesome. Yeah.
It's very true, because, you can always copy edit things. You can always proof things. Nobody has a gun to your head saying you have to publish this. But if you have that, and don't set yourself up to write 100,000 words. Concentrate on writing a good 500 words. Over here, you might see one of my heroes, Ernest Hemingway, and I don't know how clear it is, but the quote on there is basically, there's nothing to writing. You just sit down at a typewriter and bleed. And again, it's having the discipline, knowing who's going to be reading it, and then actually just sitting down and doing it. And, you can't do it on Monday and expect to have a bestseller on Tuesday. You can't do it on one Monday and then 2 Tuesdays later, sit down for another half an hour and get distracted. You just have to have that discipline. It's no different than going to the gym or any other, going to work. So many times we see business owners that talk about how busy they are, but when I ask them, why is it, how much time do you actually spend in the office? And their first answer is always, 50 or 60 hours. Then when we drill down, they're really only spending 30 or 40 hours because they're distracted with Starbucks, or they're distracted with Facebook, or they had to take their kids somewhere. Not to say that those aren't perfectly acceptable things, but don't make it into something it isn't. If you work 60 hours, then be working at 60 hours. If you're only working 40, then now you understand why you don't have any money. So just those things.
Yeah, what you said is so true, because that's what I write about in my book. The last chapter is execution. It's like, you just got to do it, right? Yeah. Just start to do it. People talk about doing things and they try to be perfect. And you know what? That's why we have editors. They can help you make it perfect. Just start putting your words down. And so many people miss that opportunity just because of that.
Well, another one of my mentors, Laura Langmeyer, who I used to work with many years ago, she told me the best description that sticks with me is perfection is poverty.
Okay, I like that.
And it's true. We all know people who they're not going to launch their new business, or they're not going to do this. It's got to be perfect, perfect, perfect. At Thanksgiving, which was just last week, how many people had an overbearing matriarch of the families? Hold on, we've got to get everything placed just right on the table. And it's like, we're just going to make a mess. And they want, we got to get the bread out. It's got to be perfect. No, it doesn't. We got family here. That's what's important. So.
Well, this was a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for being on my show. Any last words that you want to tell people?
I would love to invite all of you guys to check out the book, Prodigal Sons. It is available, as you said, on Amazon. But, I would also invite you all to don't be scared to go write your own. Don't be scared to go write your own. It's not as hard as it seems, and it's quite therapeutic, actually.
Wonderful. Yes, I love that. How do people find you?
You can find me. It's easiest on Facebook, Chris Groote, author. That's ChrisGroote, and then author. I still have my private personal Facebook is still Chris Groote, and there's not many Grootes out there, Groote. Don't get it wrong. I don't know where that'll send you, but there's not many out there. I still have my personal Facebook is not privatized, so I'm still kind of a regular guy. But that's probably the easiest way. I usually post on both of those a couple times a day, and interface with a lot of people in instant messenger and what have you. So that's probably the easiest way.
Wonderful. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's a story inside of you. You have to get it out. Put it down on a piece of paper, write a little bit on your journal, write it longhand, or just type it out. One way that I do it, and this is my way, I don't know if it's going to work for you. Sometimes when I'm driving, I voice notes to myself, and then you just have a transcribing software transcribe it for you. And that also works. So whatever your compassion is, whatever floats your boat is what I should say, is whatever floats your boat, you have a story in you, and you have experience about something that other people would like to know. If nothing else, leave it for your grandkids, because I know for a fact that my people came from India, and we've lost that part of the generation, and we don't know where to find that history. And if it was written down somewhere, we wouldn't be scrambling. But write down your stories. And until next week, when we find another author, another person to showcase on Munira's Musings, we will see you then. Have a good week. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Munira's Musings with your host, Munira Zahabi. If you enjoyed our show, please share and subscribe to this channel. And for more content, please join our Facebook group.